The day Aunt Elena died, the world seemed to collapse in slow motion. I was in the garden, elbows deep in soil, tending to the heirloom roses she had given me just weeks before for my birthday. The delicate Queen Elizabeth variety, her favorite, felt unusually heavy in my hands that day, as if they carried the weight of something unspeakable. My phone buzzed insistently 3 times against the terracotta pot, breaking my reverie. I peeled off my gloves, dirt under my nails, and answered. A formal voice greeted me, "Miss Blackwood." The name didn't register immediately, and I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, the voice continued. "This is James Morton, your Aunt Elena's attorney. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." My heart stopped mid-beat. I felt the roses tremble in my hands. Aunt Elena, my confidante, the woman who had snuck me chocolate chip cookies during dreary family gatherings, the one who had nurtured every dream I had, was gone. "Your aunt passed away in her sleep last night," Morton continued, and there was a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity. "She left explicit instructions that I contact you first before anyone else in the family." I sank to my knees, soil sticking to my fingers, barely hearing his words. "Miss Blackwood, are you there?" "Yes," I whispered hoarsely. "I'm here." What do you need me to do?" She left specific instructions regarding her funeral arrangements. And, another pause, she left a letter that must be opened before the service. "Could you come to my office today?" I looked down at the roses in my lap, remembering how she had handed them to me, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "These have been in my family for generations, just like secrets," she had said. At the time, I thought it was just one of her cryptic comments. Now, I wasn't so sure. "I'll be there in an hour," I told Morton. His office was exactly what you would imagine for someone who handled old money, dark wood panels, leather-bound books, and a sweeping view of the city skyline, probably worth more than my annual salary. He rose as I entered, offering a measured, sympathetic smile. "Miss Blackwood, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." I sank into one of the plush leather chairs, trying not to appear overwhelmed. "Mr. Morton, why did Aunt Elena want you to contact me first?" He pulled 2 envelopes from his drawer. One was official, thick, and marked with the law firm's insignia. The other was smaller, cream-colored, addressed in Aunt Elena's flowing script. "Your aunt was meticulous," Morton said carefully. "Brilliant in business, yes, but also exacting in how things should be done. She left specific instructions for her will and funeral. She wanted you to read this privately before anything else." I picked up the smaller envelope. The scent of her perfume, roses and vanilla, still clung to the paper. I opened it with trembling hands, unfolding a single sheet of her elegant stationery. "My dearest Olivia," it began. "If you are reading this, I have finally run out of time. Don't be sad. I have lived the life I wanted, and it is more than most can say. But I need one last favor, my darling niece." She instructed me to read another letter at her funeral, the one that would change our family forever, hidden in her jewelry box. She called it justice, though it might look like revenge to others. And then, the ultimate revelation, she had left everything, Montgomery Industries, personal assets, approximately $89 million to me, with the single condition that I read the hidden letter in front of the entire family. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. The estate, the company, everything hers, now mine, conditional upon unveiling the truth she had carefully hidden. "What about the rest of the family?" I asked Morton, my voice shaky. "Some minor bequests," he replied, "but the bulk is yours, assuming you follow her terms." I sank back into the chair, thinking of my father's resentment, my cousin's sycophancy, and all the years Aunt Elena had quietly observed the scheming and ambition around her. This was her way of setting the record straight, of controlling the narrative even from beyond the grave. "The funeral is in 3 days, Morton added, noting every detail meticulously. "St. Michael's Cathedral, followed by a reception at her estate. The family will be there. And remember, your aunt said, you'll know what to do with the truth." The drive to Elena's estate felt endless. My mind was racing, thinking of the letter, the hidden compartment in her jewelry box, and the family drama that was inevitable. When the gates opened, I entered the sprawling Victorian mansion, the roses climbing every surface, a living testament to her meticulous care and her eye for beauty. Mrs. Peters, her housekeeper, greeted me with tear-filled eyes but a gentle smile. She left instructions that you have full access to her rooms, she said. Thank you, Mrs. Peters. I won't be long. Elena's bedroom was a sanctuary of hidden whimsy, silk curtains in bold patterns, modern art alongside family portraits, and everywhere, the subtle scent of roses. The jewelry box awaited on her dresser, carved Brazilian rosewood, intricate floral patterns, and the small rose carving concealing the hidden compartment. I remembered her instructions from when I was 12, third petal from the left. There was a soft click, and the secret compartment slid open. Inside, an envelope, heavy, marked to be opened at the funeral, containing photographs and documents that promised to shake our family to its core. For a moment, I was tempted to open it right then, but I knew better. Aunt Elena had always orchestrated everything for maximum effect, and this was no exception. I slipped it into my bag and took a final look around the room. A photo on her bedside table caught my eye, young Elena, smiling, standing before the first office of Montgomery Industries. The knowing smile I had always admired, one that seemed to pierce through pretense and falsehood, haunted me. What secret was worth waiting a lifetime to reveal? The answer, I realized, would soon unfold in ways I could never have imagined. The hours that followed my visit to Morton's office blurred together in a haze of thoughts, half-formed plans, and a growing awareness that everything I thought I knew about my family's legacy was about to change. The roads to St. Michael's Cathedral were quiet that morning, the sky a clear, cold blue, the kind of crisp day Aunt Elena would have called perfect for business or scandal. Every red and pink rose along the estate's drive seemed to whisper reminders of her presence, her meticulous control over even the smallest details. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the weight of her letter in my bag as though it were a stone pressed against my chest, reminding me of responsibility, legacy, and the secret she had entrusted to me. The cathedral's towering stone walls came into view, their stained glass windows catching the sunlight and splintering it into a kaleidoscope of colors. Inside, the pews were already filling with faces that had spent lifetimes circling around her brilliance, distant cousins, some weeping openly, others hiding behind carefully neutral expressions, family friends with polite, calculating smiles, city officials who knew her reputation and wanted to honor it without appearing too impressed. My father intercepted me almost immediately, his eyes sharp and suspicious beneath furrowed brows. "Olivia," he said, voice tight, almost trembling with a mix of fear and irritation, "we need to talk about the will. Morton won't tell us anything. What's going on?" I met his gaze evenly, feeling an unexpected surge of calm. "We'll all find out together, Dad," I said softly but firmly. "That's what Aunt Elena wanted." His face twisted in frustration as he grabbed my arm, but I gently freed myself. "This is her funeral. Show some respect," I said quietly, leaving him standing there, mouth open in disbelief. The service began with the elegance and precision that only Aunt Elena could have orchestrated. There were no beige fabrics, no dull florals, nothing ordinary, everything bore her signature style. Deep reds, vibrant pinks, lush floral arrangements, and that sense of deliberate control over beauty that defined her life. The minister's words painted a picture of her brilliance, a woman of intellect, generosity, and unyielding principles. My mind wandered briefly to the roses in her garden and the hidden letter tucked away in her jewelry box. Soon, the anticipation would shift from thought to action. Morton, sitting in the front pew, gave me a barely perceptible nod. My hands trembled as I rose and approached the podium, the envelope in my bag now seeming impossibly heavy. Hundreds of eyes followed me, but I focused on the letters she had left, the scent of roses still faintly clinging to the paper, a reminder of her guiding presence. "My aunt, Elena Montgomery, left me a letter," I began, voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "She instructed that it be read here today, in front of everyone who knew her. This letter contains truths she believed our family needed to hear." I broke the wax seal slowly, each crack of the emblem sounding impossibly loud in the hushed cathedral. Inside were several sheets of paper and photographs that immediately captured the attention of the congregation. I pulled out the first image, a young Elena standing beside a man I didn't recognize, both smiling broadly, holding what appeared to be architectural blueprints. The second photograph showed the same man overseeing construction foundations, the beginnings of what would become Montgomery Industries. A murmur swept through the crowd, and I glanced at my father. His face was pale, almost drained of color. "My name," I read aloud, "was Eleanor Montgomery. And this is the truth about how Montgomery Industries began." The man in the photographs was Harold Bennett, a brilliant engineer and Elena's business partner in 1975. He was also the true co-founder of the company, a fact that had been carefully obscured from the public for decades. A wave of whispers coursed through the cathedral as the congregation processed this revelation. My father, seated at the front, seemed as though he had aged decades in a matter of seconds. I continued, describing how Harold and Aunt Elena had shared a vision, creating sustainable building materials that would transform the construction industry. She had brought business acumen, he had brought technical genius. Together, they had built the foundations of a company destined to become a household name. Another photograph confirmed their equal partnership, a handshake over a contract, the evidence of shared ownership, shared vision, and shared dreams. Then came the turning point, the moment Aunt Elena had clearly intended to deliver. On the night of October 15, 1976, Harold Bennett died in what was reported as a car accident, I read. But it was no accident. The brake lines of his car had been cut. Investigations closed prematurely, and by the time I discovered the truth, it was too late to reopen the case without causing widespread damage. Worse, documents had been filed transferring his share of the company to the Montgomery Family Trust. The signature on those documents was forged by my father, your own uncle, Richard Montgomery. The cathedral erupted into shocked whispers, some gasps, others incredulous murmurs. My father rose, face twisted in a mixture of rage and fear. "Stop this immediately. This is slander." "No, Dad," I said calmly, meeting his eyes. "This is the truth." I held up the documents from the envelope, the original contracts, forensic analysis of the forged papers, bank transfers, and buried police reports. Proof that Aunt Elena had meticulously preserved for decades, waiting for the right moment, for the right person, for the justice she had promised in her cryptic letters. Questions flew, accusations hung in the air like sharp daggers, but I read on. The letter explained why she had waited. The company employed thousands, supported countless families, and would not survive a public revelation until it had grown strong enough. She had spent decades carefully preparing for this moment, ensuring that truth and justice could coexist with the survival of her company. Then came the final, carefully orchestrated twist. Aunt Elena had been tracking Harold Bennett's only surviving relative, his daughter Sarah. She had funded Sarah's education, her research, her career, anonymously, ensuring that she would become the brilliant, ethical engineer her father deserved. And now, Aunt Elena had ensured that Sarah would receive her rightful 30% share of Montgomery Industries, while I would inherit the controlling interest. From the middle pew, a woman rose, dark-eyed, determined, around my age. Sarah Bennett. Her presence, meticulously planned by Aunt Elena, completed the circle of justice she had orchestrated from beyond the grave. She looked at my father, disbelief and dawning understanding in her eyes. The letter concluded, the truth laid bare, and the cathedral fell silent. I could feel Aunt Elena's presence in every corner, in the scent of roses, in the hushed reverence of the crowd. She had chosen me because she knew I could carry the burden of truth, navigate the storm of family intrigue, and do so with integrity. Her final act of wisdom had succeeded, the truth was out, the guilty exposed, and justice, finally, served. The moment the last words of Aunt Elena's letter echoed through the cathedral, a heavy silence settled over the crowd. It wasn't the respectful hush of a funeral, it was the tense, shocked stillness of a room processing betrayal, injustice, and the long-hidden skeletons of their own family history. I lowered the envelope, now empty, into my bag, feeling its weight replaced not by paper, but by the realization that my life had changed irrevocably. I could almost hear Aunt Elena's quiet, victorious smile in my mind, the way she had always known how to orchestrate drama with precision and elegance. My father sat in the front pew, his face pale and drawn, the lines of anger and guilt etched deeply into his features. He looked like a man who had been confronted with the totality of his own failings. For decades, he had hidden behind his charm, his reputation, and his wealth, but now, in the presence of everyone who had ever respected or feared Aunt Elena, there was nothing left to shield him. He looked at me with a mixture of horror, regret, and something I couldn't quite name. There was no defense he could mount. The documents, photographs, and proof in Aunt Elena's meticulous hands left nothing to argue. I had read the truth aloud, in front of the very people who had unknowingly been complicit through silence or ignorance. My cousins, John and Rebecca, slumped back in their seats like predators whose prey had slipped from their grasp. Their faces were a mixture of greed, disbelief, and fear. The inheritance they had hoped to claim, the subtle sycophantic games they had played over the years to curry favor with Aunt Elena, now meant nothing. I could see it in the way they looked at me, the way their eyes darted toward the documents I had held in my hands, desperate for a glimpse, desperate for something to salvage. But there was nothing. Aunt Elena had anticipated their schemes, had built her plan with precision, and they were now powerless. Outside the cathedral, the air seemed sharper somehow, the wind cutting through the tension that still hung in my chest. The reception that followed was a carefully curated chaos. Family members split into factions almost instantly. Some demanded that the letter be suppressed, fearing legal repercussions or social scandal. Others insisted on contacting the authorities, eager to see the guilty punished and hoping to benefit indirectly from the revelation. A few simply stood in stunned silence, grappling with the realization that the family they thought they knew, the people they trusted, admired, or envied, were not who they had appeared to be. My father disappeared almost immediately after the service. I wouldn't hear from him for weeks. When he finally re-emerged, it was from a rehabilitation facility, forced to confront the guilt he had buried for 45 years. I had no contact with him during that period, no phone calls, no letters. The silence was heavy, but it allowed me to process what had happened and understand the scale of Aunt Elena's foresight. She had not just orchestrated justice, she had engineered redemption not for my father, necessarily, but for the company, for Harold Bennett's legacy, and for me, the niece she had trusted above all others. Sarah Bennett remained at the forefront of this unfolding drama. After the funeral, she approached me quietly, her expression a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and a barely concealed anxiety. I could see the weight of her father's story pressing down on her shoulders, years of ignorance suddenly lifted, revealing a painful but necessary truth. "I don't even know where to begin," she whispered, her eyes glistening with emotion. I placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Begin wherever you need," I said softly. "Your father's vision has been honored, and now, together, we can continue what he started." The first few days after the funeral were a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategic planning. The media had caught wind of the story, of course. The revelation that Montgomery Industries had been built on deceit, that my father had forged documents and betrayed his business partner, sent shockwaves through the business community. Shareholders demanded meetings, lawyers called daily, and the employees of the company looked to me for reassurance. Aunt Elena's plan had been meticulous. She had anticipated every fallout, ensuring that the company was strong enough to survive the public revelation of her brother's crimes. But strength on paper does not erase the emotional complexity of facing family betrayal head-on. I found myself repeatedly reflecting on Aunt Elena's brilliance. She had given me a legacy that was not just financial, but moral. Her trust in me wasn't merely about inheriting Montgomery Industries, it was about carrying forward her values, her dedication to ethics, and her vision for a company built on integrity. That responsibility, immense as it was, also brought clarity. Where my father had succumbed to greed and opportunism, I was tasked with turning betrayal into a catalyst for growth, for justice, and for long-term success. And I intended to do so, precisely as Aunt Elena had envisioned. Confrontations with family were inevitable. My father, when he finally returned from rehabilitation, was a changed man. The arrogance, defensiveness, and sense of entitlement that had characterized him for decades were gone, replaced by guilt and, eventually, a fragile willingness to face accountability. My cousins, however, proved far more difficult. They oscillated between indignation, entitlement, and fleeting moments of contrition, but their understanding of responsibility and ethics remained shallow. I had to navigate these encounters carefully, balancing the legal authority Aunt Elena had vested in me with the need to maintain some semblance of familial cohesion or at least civility. Amidst all of this, Sarah Bennet became not just a partner, but a constant reminder of why Aunt Elena had structured the revelations as she had. Our meetings, initially formal and cautious, soon evolved into a collaborative partnership. We shared ideas, strategies, and insights, all while honoring the legacy of her father and Aunt Elena's vision. There was a profound sense of alignment, of mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that the mistakes of the past could be corrected, but only if approached with intelligence, patience, and ethical rigor. I also spent time revisiting Aunt Elena's estate, the rose gardens, and her personal study. Each visit was a meditation, a chance to absorb the meticulous care she had taken with every detail of her life. The roses she had planted, the letters she had written, the hidden compartments in her jewelry box, all were testaments to her precision, her creativity, and her unyielding commitment to justice. I realized that her gift to me was not only the company but the blueprint for how to manage power responsibly, with foresight, compassion, and an unflinching commitment to truth. And so, the days passed, blending grief with strategy, revelation with reflection. Aunt Elena's letter had set in motion a series of events that would forever redefine our family, our company, and our understanding of justice. I felt the weight of her expectations constantly, yet I also felt the quiet reassurance of her guidance. She had entrusted me with more than assets, she had entrusted me with the power to make things right, to honor the past without being bound by it, and to build a future that reflected the principles she had lived by. By the end of that first week, the immediate chaos had begun to settle. The family was fractured, but the company was stable, its employees motivated by the transparency and ethical leadership that Sarah and I were establishing. The truth, finally exposed, had acted as a catalyst for accountability, reflection, and change. Aunt Elena's foresight had ensured that justice was not only served but sustainable. And in that realization, I found a sense of peace, a recognition that the woman who had taught me to read, to think critically, and to act with integrity had done one final, extraordinary thing. She had trained me to carry the torch she had built, and to shine it brightly in a world often shadowed by deceit. The weeks following Aunt Elena's funeral were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and endless phone calls. The company, though financially stable, was in need of direction, morale, and a renewed sense of purpose. Employees whispered in corridors, curious about the sudden leadership changes and the mysterious young woman, myself, now at the helm, alongside Sarah Bennet, whose presence was equally striking and commanding. It was a delicate balance, honoring Elena's legacy while also asserting our authority in a company long dominated by secrecy, favoritism, and long-standing power dynamics. Sarah and I quickly discovered that our complementary strengths were more than just fortunate coincidence, they were precisely what the company needed. I brought a meticulous understanding of operations, strategic planning, and a deep respect for ethical leadership, qualities Aunt Elena had nurtured in me over the years. Sarah, with her technical expertise, innovative mindset, and passion for sustainable engineering, brought fresh ideas that could modernize the company, honor her father's legacy, and take Montgomery Industries into a future that Elena had always envisioned, even if she had not lived to see it herself. Together, we formed a partnership that combined the precision of business acumen with the boldness of scientific innovation. The first challenge was addressing public perception. News of the true origins of Montgomery Industries had spread, and the media frenzy was unrelenting. Headlines painted a vivid picture of betrayal, forged documents, and decades of hidden crimes. Some questioned whether the company would survive the scandal, others speculated on its future under my leadership. We had to act quickly, not just to stabilize the stock and reassure investors, but to send a clear message: the company would continue to thrive, built on truth, integrity, and the principles Aunt Elena had always championed. Sarah and I spent hours preparing public statements, holding press conferences, and meeting with investors to outline our vision, a company committed to innovation, ethics, and sustainable growth. Internally, the task was equally daunting. Some senior executives, long loyal to my father and his version of the company, were skeptical of our leadership. Meetings were tense, as these individuals tested our resolve, challenged our decisions, and questioned our plans. It became clear that Aunt Elena's foresight extended beyond her will. She had cultivated an internal culture that could survive disruption, but it was now up to us to guide it, to rebuild trust and morale, and to inspire employees to embrace the future. I found myself drawing on lessons from my aunt, her patience, her ability to observe and assess before acting, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Slowly, conversations shifted from doubt to cautious optimism. Our first major initiative was the development of a new sustainable materials division, spearheaded by Sarah. Her father's original vision had been revolutionary: create environmentally conscious building materials that could reshape the construction industry. Aunt Elena had nurtured that vision indirectly through years of funding Sarah's education and career, ensuring she had the tools and knowledge to make an impact. Now, with the company's resources at our disposal, we could bring that vision to life on a massive scale. The planning meetings were intense hours of research, market analysis, and strategy sessions, but the energy in the room was electric. Employees began to see that this wasn't just a business endeavor, it was a mission, a continuation of legacies interrupted by greed and deceit. Meanwhile, I focused on corporate restructuring. Transparency was paramount. We established new reporting systems, auditing procedures, and ethical guidelines that were shared openly with the entire company. Each department underwent a thorough review, not to punish employees, but to ensure accountability and build a culture of trust. It was a delicate dance, balancing authority with collaboration, enforcing standards without alienating the workforce. The lessons Aunt Elena had imparted to me over a lifetime, careful observation, patience, decisiveness, became my guiding principles. Slowly, the company began to shift. Resistance softened into engagement. Skepticism gave way to cautious enthusiasm. The culture of fear and secrecy was replaced with one of empowerment, integrity, and shared purpose. Yet, challenges continued to emerge. Competitors seized upon the temporary vulnerability of Montgomery Industries, attempting to undermine our initiatives, poach key talent, and capitalize on the scandal. Legal challenges surfaced as distant relatives and opportunistic investors tried to contest Aunt Elena's will, claiming entitlement to the company or disputing the legitimacy of her directives. Each obstacle required careful navigation, meticulous documentation, and, at times, the kind of strategic boldness that only Elena's blueprint for justice could inspire. I relied on Sarah not just for her technical brilliance, but for her level-headedness and clarity in moments of high tension. Her insights often revealed solutions I hadn't considered, and together we presented a unified front that became the standard for leadership within the company. Through it all, I returned frequently to Aunt Elena's rose garden. The blooms, vibrant and abundant, seemed almost symbolic of the company itself, beauty arising from careful cultivation, from soil enriched with dedication, patience, and resilience. Standing among the roses, I often reflected on her wisdom. Secrets could destroy or empower, but truth, when handled with care, could transform even the darkest circumstances. I realized that her legacy was not just financial or operational, it was moral, ethical, and profoundly human. By honoring her vision, I wasn't merely running a company, I was shaping a culture, a community, a force for positive impact in the world. The pivotal moment came when we launched our first line of sustainable materials to the public. The project, months in the making, represented not only innovation but the culmination of Aunt Elena's foresight, Harold Bennett's pioneering work, and the promise of a new era for Montgomery Industries. Employees, investors, and media representatives gathered for the launch, and the reception was overwhelmingly positive. Articles praised the company's forward-thinking approach, its commitment to sustainability, and the ethical leadership demonstrated by the new management team. The launch wasn't just a business victory, it was a symbolic triumph over the decades of injustice and secrecy that had once defined the company. Aunt Elena's plan had worked. Her trust in me, in Sarah, in the enduring power of truth, had borne fruit. Amid these successes, Sarah and I cultivated a deeper understanding and respect for one another. Beyond the boardroom, we shared long discussions about ethics, leadership, and innovation. We strategized not just for profit, but for impact, sustainable development, employee welfare, and social responsibility. Sarah often spoke of the invisible hand that had guided her career, her education, and her opportunities. It was Aunt Elena, I reminded her. She believed in both of us, even before we realized we needed her guidance. We laughed quietly, acknowledging the surreal intertwining of fate, foresight, and family legacy that had brought us together. By the end of the first year, Montgomery Industries had stabilized, grown, and evolved in ways that Aunt Elena could have scarcely imagined but would undoubtedly have been proud of. The company, once burdened by secrets and deceit, had been transformed into a model of ethical innovation. Employees were engaged, investors were confident, and the public viewed the company as a leader in sustainable technology. And at the center of it all, Sarah and I carried forward a legacy that honored the past, confronted injustice, and embraced the promise of a better future. The roses continued to bloom outside my office window, reminders of resilience, patience, and the enduring power of truth. Every time I looked at them, I thought of Aunt Elena, the woman who had planned decades in advance, who had trusted me with secrets and power, and who had taught me that sometimes the heaviest inheritances aren't measured in wealth, but in the courage to confront truth, to correct wrongs, and to create something beautiful from the soil of the past. The years that followed Aunt Elena's death were transformative, both for Montgomery Industries and for myself. What had begun as a journey of grief and bewilderment evolved into a deep understanding of responsibility, legacy, and the intricate threads that connect family, ethics, and ambition. The company, once fraught with hidden betrayals and long-kept secrets, had been reshaped into a force for good, a living testament to Elena's vision, Harold Bennett's ingenuity, and the enduring power of truth. Every step forward, every board meeting, every innovation was now guided by the principles she had instilled in me through subtle lessons, cryptic comments, and unspoken wisdom over decades. Sarah and I had become more than co-leaders, we were partners in purpose. Our bond, forged through the shared responsibility of restoring integrity to a company built on deception, had grown into a profound professional and personal alliance. We celebrated victories together, navigated crises together, and sometimes, when the boardroom doors closed and the meetings ended, we reflected quietly on the journey that had brought us here. The story of Harold Bennett and Aunt Elena, once hidden in dusty photographs and sealed envelopes, had become our shared mission, a guiding light for every decision we made. The first few years were the most intense. Montgomery Industries' public image, initially shaken by revelations of past betrayals, required careful rehabilitation. We launched a series of initiatives highlighting transparency, sustainability, and social responsibility. Employees, initially wary of the changes, began to embrace the company's renewed ethos. Open forums replaced secretive meetings, collaborative projects encouraged innovation, and mentorship programs honored Aunt Elena's commitment to nurturing talent. It was deeply satisfying to see young engineers and project managers flourish under an environment that valued integrity over politics, collaboration over competition. One of the most emotionally significant aspects of rebuilding the company was Sarah Bennett's rise. The once anonymous beneficiary of Aunt Elena's quiet generosity had blossomed into a visionary leader. Her innovative sustainable materials division, which had been a pilot project, became the crown jewel of Montgomery Industries, attracting international attention and establishing the company as a pioneer in eco-conscious construction solutions. Witnessing her growth reminded me daily of Aunt Elena's wisdom, the careful orchestration of events, the quiet guidance from afar, and the power of patience and foresight. In many ways, it was as if Elena's spirit was still present in every decision we made, her fingerprints visible in the success that followed. Personal growth for me was equally profound. Inheriting a multi-million-dollar company overnight could have been overwhelming, but the experience transformed me in ways I had never anticipated. I learned the delicate balance between authority and empathy, decisiveness and patience, action and reflection. Aunt Elena had chosen me for a reason, and her trust forced me to rise to a level of leadership I might never have discovered on my own. I began to understand the real weight of responsibility, not the financial aspects, but the moral imperative to honor promises, confront injustice, and use power to create positive change. Each decision I made carried the echoes of her teachings, each challenge an opportunity to embody the principles she valued. The most poignant moments, however, were never in the boardroom or during high-profile launches, they were in the quiet spaces, the everyday reminders of Aunt Elena's enduring influence. I often returned to her rose garden, now fully restored, vibrant with life and color. The Queen Elizabeth roses she had gifted me years ago, which had initially been symbols of memory and nostalgia, had become living representations of resilience, patience, and growth. I spent hours among them, reflecting on the journey that had brought me from grief to empowerment. It was here, amidst the blooms, that I often felt closest to her, her spirit seemingly intertwined with the petals, the leaves, and the soil itself. One particularly reflective afternoon, Sarah and I sat in the garden, reviewing a new proposal for a sustainable housing project. The sun was low, casting a warm golden glow over the roses. She leaned back, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and said softly, "It's strange, isn't it? How someone can shape our lives from beyond the grave." I nodded, understanding entirely. "Elena," I said, "she planned for this. Every challenge, every secret, every delayed truth, it was all so that the right people could make it right." We shared a quiet smile, the weight of past injustices balanced by the promise of the future we were building. The company continued to thrive, not merely financially but ethically, socially, and culturally. We implemented scholarship programs for aspiring engineers, funded research in green technology, and established a foundation in Harold Bennett's name to continue supporting innovative and ethical projects. Through these initiatives, Montgomery Industries became more than a business, it became a legacy of justice, innovation, and moral responsibility. Employees often remarked on the sense of pride and purpose that had returned to the company, and it was clear that Elena's vision had not only been preserved but expanded. On a personal level, I also reconciled with the complexities of my family. My father, initially enraged and bitter at the revelations of his own father's crimes, eventually came to terms with the truth during his rehabilitation and therapy. Though our relationship remained cautious, there was a new understanding, a shared acknowledgement of responsibility, and a recognition that some truths, though painful, were necessary for healing. Cousins who had once schemed and maneuvered were either sidelined or integrated into the company under strict ethical guidance. The family dynamics, though still complicated, had shifted in a way that allowed for accountability, growth, and, most importantly, the pursuit of justice rather than revenge. The most significant lesson I carried from this journey was the transformative power of truth when paired with patience and courage. Aunt Elena had waited decades to reveal her secrets, ensuring that they would be used to create justice rather than chaos. She had entrusted me with that responsibility, knowing I could face uncomfortable truths with integrity and resolve. That lesson became the guiding principle of my leadership, that wealth, power, and knowledge are meaningless without responsibility, ethical action, and a commitment to doing what is right. 1 year after the funeral, I stood once again in Aunt Elena's rose garden, the air fragrant with blooms in every shade of red and pink. Sarah joined me, her hand brushing lightly over a Queen Elizabeth rose, a smile playing on her lips. "Do you ever think about how much of this was her design?" she asked. I nodded, gazing at the sunlight filtering through the petals. Every step, every challenge, every victory, it was all her plan. And now, it's ours to continue. In that moment, I realized that the legacy we inherited was not just a company, but a philosophy, a moral compass, and a blueprint for change. Later that evening, alone in my study, I found one last note from Aunt Elena tucked into her old desk calendar. Written on the day she had passed, it read, "Dearest Olivia, you have handled everything with grace and courage. The company, the people, and the truth are in your hands. Build it better than I could, and never forget that beauty and justice can grow from even the darkest soil if tended with care." I smiled, feeling the weight of her words and the magnitude of her trust. It was a reminder that the greatest inheritance is not wealth, but the wisdom and moral strength passed from one generation to the next. As I looked out over the rose garden, the sun setting in golden hues, I understood fully that Aunt Elena had given me far more than a company. She had given me the chance to correct a lifetime of injustice, to honor a hidden legacy, and to build something that could endure beyond our time. And just like the roses in her garden, nurtured with care and patience, truth, justice, and integrity could bloom, even in the most complicated soil of human history. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was also beautiful, and I was ready to carry it, just as she had intended.